Hey, look at that. It's Daddy. We don't need a defective woman who can't have kids. Just disappear. When I went to celebrate my sister's new baby, she handed her newborn to my husband and casually said that. That's how it is. I'm divorcing you and marrying her. I had been struggling with infertility and undergoing treatments. My husband never understood my pain. He started spending money recklessly and even borrowed money from my parents. All that money was to shower on my sister. My sister never told me she was pregnant, and when I asked who the father was, she dodged the question. I never imagined the father was my husband. I couldn't forgive them. In my despair, my mother-in-law was the one who stood by me. When she revealed a shocking truth to my husband, he turned pale, but my revenge was just beginning. My name is Mary. I'm married to Tom, who works at a company. We live with Tom's mother, Nora. We've been married for 5 years. At first, I was ready to be a housewife and take care of Tom's widowed mother. But Tom said, the economy's tough, and as long as you can work, I'd like you to work too. I liked working, so we both continued working. Tom and I often had disagreements due to our busy schedules, leading to petty arguments. But my mother-in-law always supported me during those times. Knowing my husband's displeasure during our fights, her presence was a great comfort to me in his family's home. Our marriage had one big problem. Even after 5 years, we still hadn't been able to have children. Hey, I'm thinking of going to the hospital again on our next day off. I stopped my chores and spoke to Tom, who was lying on the living room sofa watching TV. I had been undergoing infertility treatments in between work and house chores. But without much success. Oh, is that so? I have work that day. Tom responded without looking away from the TV. I know, but can't you make some time? I want you to get tested at least once. You know I can't just take off work like that. You go to the hospital by yourself. My husband turned up the TV volume with a sour expression. He was always like this. Even though I was struggling with not being able to have kids, he acted like he didn't care at all. Infertility was supposed to be our problem as a couple. Tom, Mary always goes to the hospital by herself. I know you're busy with work, but just go with her once. This is a problem for both of you. My mother-in-law said, trying to reason with him. Once again, she came to my rescue. Fine, you women stick together. I'll go, okay? Tom grumbled, turning off the TV roughly and stomping out of the living room. I didn't like his attitude, but at least, thanks to my mother-in-law, we were finally going to the hospital together. Still, I wondered why he was so reluctant to go. Was work really the only reason? Even on the day of the appointment, Tom seemed irritated. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel while we waited at traffic lights and didn't say a word to me. I wanted to ask why he was in such a bad mood, but I was scared it would make him refuse to go to the hospital. So, I stayed silent, hoping the tests would go smoothly. The tests went without a hitch, and we were just waiting for the results. Tom, however, started getting ready to leave as soon as the tests were done. Wait a minute! We haven't gotten the results yet! Tom scowled and made an obvious sound of annoyance. I got goosebumps for a second. I have to check out a place nearby for a business meeting. I'm busy too. I came this far, isn't that enough? You get the results by yourself. But also, go borrow some money for that business meeting. I'll give it to you when I get back. Bye. He tossed his wallet at me and left the waiting room with big strides. Left alone, I clenched my fists and bit my lip. Why was he so indifferent? I was beyond angry, I was devastated. I felt like an idiot, worrying and suffering all by myself. Looking at the wallet he threw at me, I thought, again. For the past 3 years, Tom had been withdrawing large sums of money from our joint account every month, using business meetings and drinks with colleagues as excuses. Even with both of us working, withdrawing money every month was hitting our finances hard. During those times, my husband always told me to borrow money from my parents. My father ran a business. So he had money, but I didn't want to rely on him. I wanted to live independently with my husband and support my mother-in-law. I thought that was the right thing to do, but my husband didn't seem to care. Just like with infertility treatments, this issue weighed heavily on my heart. I always wondered if he really needed that much money every month for business meetings and drinks with colleagues. But I knew asking him would just lead to the same response: it's for work. A nurse came into the waiting room to escort me to the doctor's office for the test results. Since my husband had already left, I had to hear the results alone. I was used to being alone at the hospital, but today, it was my husband's test results too. I wanted us both to be there. When I got home that night, Tom came to the door. For a moment, I hoped he was worried about the infertility results, but that hope quickly faded. "Did you get the money?" It wasn't about our child, it was about money. I clenched my fists and bit my lip. Before taking off my shoes, I firmly told him I wouldn't borrow money anymore. His face twisted with anger. "Why didn't you get the money? I told you we need it for business meetings." I didn't back down. "It's too much money every month. I can't keep borrowing." "Do business meetings really cost that much?" "It's my job. It can't be helped." "Again? You always say the same thing. I've never heard of a job like that. I don't want to rely on my father anymore. I want us to manage on our own." "What? Don't act high and mighty when you can't even have kids. I said we need the money. It's for work. Supporting me is your job as my wife." I got goosebumps again. My husband looked at me with contempt, as if I were some kind of animal. His eyes were cold, like I wasn't even human because I couldn't have kids. I couldn't take it and stared down the hallway towards my mother-in-law's room. She might have already gone to bed. I wondered if I should tell her about what happened today. In the end, I decided to visit my parents instead. Sitting across the table from my parents, my father sighed and said, "Again?" He reluctantly placed the money on the table. "You need to think this through more," he added. I kept my head down, clenching my fists and biting my lip. Why did I have to go through this? Maybe I was wrong to borrow money, as my husband asked. But it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. "Hey, Mary! Long time no see. How have you been? What brings you here today?" By chance, my sister Meg had also come home that day. I couldn't tell her I was there to borrow money. She thought my husband and I were living well. I didn't want to worry about her money. As I was trying to change the subject, I noticed she looked much fuller than before. "Meg, are you?" "Oh, did you notice?" "Yep, I'm pregnant," she said casually. I was too shocked to speak. I never imagined my sister was pregnant. My parents didn't know either. We asked her about the father, but she only said he was an elite at a big company and would be a CEO in the future. At least she could tell me his name. I felt uneasy about my sister's vague answers, but no matter how much I asked, she only gave me evasive replies. Eventually, I learned nothing more. 6 months later, my sister gave birth safely. I went to visit her in the hospital, bringing flowers despite thinking I might be a bother. When I opened the door to her room, I expected to see my sister, her baby, and her husband. But there was Tom, my husband. "Tom, what are you doing here? I told you Meg had the baby, but I didn't expect you to come," I said, surprised. Tom smiled strangely. It made me feel an eerie sense of fear. He suddenly picked up my sister's baby. "Look, it's Daddy." I couldn't comprehend what my sister just said. Daddy. Did she just call Tom Daddy? Tom, with a smile I had never seen before, gently rocked the baby. "Tom, what's going on?" I managed to ask, though my head was spinning. "Let me say it. We don't need a defective woman who can't have kids. Just disappear." Before he could answer, my sister said, "I'm divorcing you and marrying Meg." Tom smirked. I dropped the flowers I brought and stood there in shock. What was I hearing? Remember when I worked at a nightclub? That's when I met Tom. He was so generous, and I asked him for a lot. That's how it is. Don't feel bad. It's your fault for not being able to have kids. And those hospital bills really add up. Too bad, Mary. Here's a souvenir. Just sign it and you're done. Tom laughed and handed me a divorce paper. My mind was still spinning as I looked at the form in disbelief. Naturally, I was in shock, feeling a wave of bitterness and the urge to clench my fists and bite my lip. But more than anything, I was filled with intense anger. Anger at having loved such a man and having considered such a sister as family. I started to recall Tom's behavior. My sister mentioned how generous he was, and he said that hospital bills were expensive. It was clear that all the money I borrowed from my parents had been spent on them. And despite my efforts with infertility treatments, he was completely uncooperative. It all made sense. I took the divorce papers from Tom without saying a word, leaving the flowers on the floor as I walked out of the hospital room. Their ugly laughter followed me until the door closed. That same day, I submitted the divorce papers at a lawyer's office and made a vow on my way back. I would get revenge on those two. That night, after finalizing the divorce, I went home to gather my belongings. To my surprise, Tom was already there. "What are you still doing here?" Tom said cheerfully, lounging on the sofa with a beer in hand, watching TV. I thought that beer must taste especially good after betraying someone so thoroughly. But I wanted him to know his carefree days were numbered. I wasn't just there for my belongings, I was there for revenge. "Welcome back, Mary." "Tom, what do you mean by that?" "Mary, what happened?" My mother-in-law asked worriedly, standing between us. It seemed Tom hadn't told her about my sister. My chance for revenge had come sooner than expected. Though we were now strangers, I was sure my mother-in-law would still support me. I first told her about Tom and my sister's baby, and how he had been spending large amounts of money on my sister. I explained how I had to borrow money from my parents to cover it. My mother-in-law was understandably shocked. "Tom, aren't you ashamed of what you've done? How could you be so shameless? You've even caused trouble for Mary's family. Your father would be so heartbroken if he were alive." She scolded Tom fiercely and cried. It was no wonder. He truly was a foolish son, wasn't he? But Tom just laughed, his expression unchanged. "What are you talking about, Mom? Now you can finally see your grandkid. Isn't that great? If I'd stayed with this woman, it never would have happened. She's a defective woman who can't have kids." He took a swig of his beer, looking pleased with himself. His words were so cruel that anyone else would have burst into tears. But they didn't affect me at all. Seeing his lack of remorse, I realized it was time to reveal the secret I'd been keeping. This was my chance for revenge. I was about to speak when I met my mother-in-law's eyes. She gave me a small nod. I understood her intention and decided to let her handle it. Since we were already strangers and he looked down on me so much, I thought hearing it from his own mother would be more effective. It would likely have a greater impact and fulfill my revenge better than if I told him myself. "Actually, Tom, there's something we've been keeping from you. You're the one who can't have kids." Tom was bewildered by the sudden change in his mother, who had been distraught just moments before. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I just told you, I have a kid with Mary's sister. Remember about 6 months ago when you went to the hospital with Mary for tests? It turns out you're infertile. You left before hearing the results, but Mary told me that night." Tom was so stunned by the sudden revelation that he remained frozen, beer foam still clinging to his lips, unable to move. "We kept it a secret to protect you, but look at what you've done." Tom jumped up, slamming the beer can on the table. "That's nonsense. The doctor made it up to get money. I don't believe it." His face turned even redder than when he was drunk. I remained calm and said, "Then let's visit other hospitals and check." "Fine. I'll prove you wrong, you defective woman." A few days later, we went to another hospital. And the results were the same. Tom was infertile. Tom froze, beer foam still on his lips, unable to move. We kept it a secret to protect you, but look at what you've done, she continued. Tom jumped up, slamming the beer can on the table. Tom sat in the hospital waiting room, unable to hide his confusion, and then, to my surprise, he suddenly started crying. I thought nothing could faze me anymore, but this did. Inside, though, I was thinking, serves you right. My tightly clenched fists turned into a victorious gesture, and I felt the tension in my bitten lip relax. But my revenge wasn't over yet. After all the humiliation I endured, I needed to make them suffer more. I still had another card to play. Tom, realizing the baby wasn't his, stopped crying and stormed into the hospital where my sister was staying. I followed, ready for more revenge and to witness the scene. Meg! What the hell is going on? Isn't that baby ours? Have you been lying to me all this time? Tom yelled as he burst into the room, his anger palpable. My sister, looking confused, sat up in bed. I stood behind, watching with satisfaction. The baby, unaware of the chaos, slept peacefully in the small crib beside her. What are you talking about? How did I lie to you? Meg stammered, clearly bewildered. Seeing Tom too angry to make sense, I decided to explain. Wait, what? That's impossible. This is definitely your child, Tom. The test must be wrong. Meg insisted desperately, pointing at the sleeping baby. Shut up. I don't believe you. Tell me, whose baby is this? Tom shouted, pointing at the baby. His rage was so intense that no amount of denial from Meg would calm him down. You're awful, Mary. Just because you can't have children, you're doing this to me? Do you hold a grudge against me? Meg finally turned on me, making me scoff. How could she say that? But this was just the beginning. I had something else prepared for my revenge. Can you still say that after seeing this? I said calmly, handing her a piece of paper. Meg frowned as she took it. It was a report from a private investigator. I had you investigated. It turns out you have another man you're living with, a so-called YouTuber. He's the real father, isn't he? I scattered the report and photos of my sister with the other man across her bed. Meg's face went pale, and she looked like she might pass out. Tom picked up the photos and, filled with rage, threw them at her. You've been planning this from the start. You tricked me and had a baby with this guy. Was I just a cash cow to you? I did everything for you, and it was all for this guy? Meg, cornered, couldn't speak for a moment. Then, suddenly, she glared at us with a defiant smile on her face. So what if you were a cash cow? At the bar, you always ordered the most expensive drinks and bragged about being an elite with a high salary and a future CEO. I was with you for the money. What else did you have to offer? She spilled everything. Watching it, I couldn't help but think how foolish she was. Tom, speechless, stared at the photos of Meg with another man. He looked pitiful. Deceived by someone who showed no remorse. But I had no sympathy for him. I still had another card to play. Too bad. This man never had any money. All the money he spent came from me, working hard and borrowing to support his lifestyle. I spoke coldly, full of years of pent-up resentment. Shut up. You have no right to talk to me like that. I don't want to see your face. Get out of here. Tom screamed, his face red with anger. He was beyond pathetic, revealing his true, ugly self. Thinking he shouldn't continue his disgraceful behavior in the hospital, I decided to play my final card. I discreetly sent a message on my phone. Shortly after, Tom's phone rang. I smiled. I watched his face turn from red to pale as he answered. What's wrong? I knew what the call was about, but I asked anyway just for fun. I've been transferred to a rural area. Starting next month. Seeing the pitiful man, lost in thought, I mentally did a victory pose. It worked. I had sent a message to my father earlier. It turns out that the company Tom works for has my father as its largest shareholder. I had asked my dad to have Tom's boss call him with the transfer news at this precise moment. Betraying me had put Tom in a precarious position, and now I could deliver the final blow. I usually don't like to rely on my father, but this time I made an exception. And he agreed. For his daughter's sake. "This is all your fault, Meg. If you hadn't lied, I wouldn't have left her. I wouldn't have been transferred either." He was beyond pitiful now, more pathetic than ever. "Oh, please. You lied to me too, pretending to be rich. I wouldn't have dated you if you weren't. Your face isn't even my type." Meg shot back, just as foolish as ever. The two of them started a loud argument in the hospital room, waking the baby, who began to cry. A nurse rushed in and scolded them both harshly. Watching them shrink under the nurse's reprimand, I felt a sense of satisfaction. It was no different from when my mother-in-law or my parents scolded them. My revenge was complete. Finally, I glanced at the crying baby and thought, maybe you're the real victim here, and left the hospital with a small smile. Even after all this, Tom continued his disgraceful behavior. He tried to get back with me, claiming that the baby wasn't his and that since we couldn't have children, it wasn't really cheating. But I had secretly recorded our conversation in the hospital. Tom, now transferred and drowning in debt, couldn't rely on me anymore and turned to Meg for help. But Meg wasn't going to support him. After being discharged from the hospital, she disappeared with the so-called YouTuber. Betrayed and desperate for revenge, Tom became a stalker, obsessively showing up wherever Meg posted on social media. Unable to tolerate Tom's stalking, the so-called YouTuber left my sister and the newborn baby behind and disappeared. I don't know what happened to Tom and my sister after that. With all the trouble she caused, my parents had already disowned her, and she never returned home. As for me, a new chapter in my life began. I unexpectedly started a relationship with a man I met through a hiking group. We first met on a mountain, and I was drawn to his cheerful smile and positive attitude. Our friendship grew into something more, and eventually, he proposed to me. After getting married, we were blessed with twins, who are now growing up healthy and strong. Our life as a family of 4 is filled with happiness and fulfillment, making my previous loneliness and anxiety feel like a distant memory. I truly feel happy now.